Hello YouTube, thank you for clicking on this video and shout out to Big Daddy Algorithm for pimping it out to you. My name is Megan and welcome to my channel. I am a self-taught historical sewist and I recreate garments that I see in museums and fashion plates and portraits entirely by hand, using only the materials and techniques that would have been available to a seamstress at the time of the garment's original creation. I also love fashion, both historical and modern, and today I'm going to be talking about something that is very controversial in the fashion world, and that is fur. Fur has become a bit of a dirty word in recent years, which is not the worst thing in my opinion. I'm just gonna lay my cards on the table right now and say that I have a lot of real fur pieces, but the caveat is that all of my fur pieces are vintage and secondhand and thrifted. I would never ever buy real fur. So I'm just gonna put that out there on the table so that you know what my opinions are on the subject. Even if you're not a fashion lover, you probably can guess why fur is such a hot button issue. PETA has come out with a few campaigns that target people who wear fur.
Is that a real fur? Well, of course this is a real fur. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
There is a really strong argument out there for why you shouldn't even wear vintage or secondhand fur. So I'm going to explore that a little bit as well. And I'm going to give you some of the research I found on this topic. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I personally will still wear fur. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to show you all of the fur pieces in my collection and how I wear them. So if you are someone who wears fur, whether faux fur or real fur, and you want some tips on styling, just stick around till the end and we'll go through that a little bit. I also want to say, before we really dive into this, please be nice in the comment section. This is a really contentious issue, like I've said before, and arguments about fur can get really heated. So I want to create a space where we can debate this topic and talk about the pros and cons of fake fur versus real fur versus vintage fur in a safe place where everybody's ideas can be heard respectfully. So you please be respectful in the comment section. I will be monitoring it. If I see any hate comments, anyone saying like fur is murder, or any condescending comments against PETA, I will delete them. I want everybody to be able to air their opinions and feel safe doing so. So I'm gonna put that out there. I would love to get a discussion going around this because I don't really see a lot of videos on YouTube discussing fur. I found like one or two in my research, but that's it. So I would really love to get some kind of a discussion going, and I would like to see what people's opinions are on this topic, because obviously I know mine and I have my own, but I don't really know other people's, so it would be really nice to hear what you guys think about this issue. So today I'm going to explore some of the arguments for and against fur, whether it be real fur, fake fur, or vintage, and let you decide where you stand on the issue. Without further ado, let's dive into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the fur industry and why it's so cruel. I'm not going to go into detail about what happens to the animals who are farmed for their fur. I think it's personally really horrible, and I don't want to trigger anyone who's watching this. There's a lot of research you can do on your own, so if you're interested in that and you want to know more, I invite you to go do so. I think there's no doubt, question, or argument about it. The fur industry is cruel and it's terrible, and I'm not denying or minimizing that. And as an animal lover, like seriously, I have 3 dogs and I love baby animals more than I love baby humans. Like, that being said, I am also not a vegetarian or a vegan. I do eat meat, but I do want to make it clear from the outset that I do not under any circumstances support the fur industry. I would never buy new fur. I would and do buy vintage furs, however, and I love them, but I would also never buy fake fur if it's new, because it's also terrible for the environment and it kills just as many animals as the fur industry does, but I will go into that a little bit more later. But I am going to tell you right now that if you hate fur but love fast food and eat hamburgers and bacon and enjoy ice cream and cheesecake and wear leather shoes, then I have bad news for you. Most animals who are raised for meat, milk, and hides are also factory farmed in horrible conditions and killed inhumanely. On the whole, our species is absolutely terrible to animals, and if you feel strongly about fur but not about bacon, then you're not alone. A lot of people feel that way, but you should do a bit more research. Standing up for animal welfare also means cutting back on meat consumption or sourcing your meat from ethical, sustainable farmers, and committing to not buying any leather pieces. So if you feel really strongly about people wearing fur, but you don't feel really strongly about people eating hamburgers or bacon or wearing leather shoes, most people feel that way, you're not alone, but you should just know that animals who are raised for their meat and their hides are treated just as horribly as animals who are raised for their fur. It's not like people are especially cruel to animals that they're taking fur from. It's just really horrible right across the board. So if you're someone who's very committed to animal welfare and animal rights, then I'm sure you probably already don't consume animal products. But if you're someone who maybe feels that fur is wrong, but are okay eating steak and bacon, that's just maybe something to consider, that it's not just the animals farmed for their fur who are treated badly. It's like animals right across the board. Unfortunately, I wish that was not the case, but it is, and you can help change that by committing to not using animal products at all. Oh my god, this is turning into like a preachy vegan video. I'm sorry. I'm not even vegan. Like I'm not even a vegetarian. I love seafood. Like octopus is delicious.
I like it.
Okay, like I'm not even vegan, but I'm just saying, don't get mad about this one thing if you're not also going to get mad about these other things, all right? And like, I know people are going to comment me in the comments for that, but I'm just saying, I'm just putting that out there. But also, if you feel really strongly about animal rights and animal welfare, something to look into if you don't already do this is committing to not buying faux fur or like vegan leather products either, because the materials that are used in those products very much contribute to the large-scale destruction of our environment, which kills even more animals than factory farms because it destroys their habitats and the natural ecosystems on which they rely for survival. A lot of people wear it as an alternative to real fur, and actually a lot of big designers like Stella McCartney and Chloe have come out and said that they are never going to use real fur in their designs again, and they use faux fur instead.
So I created a label called Fur Free Fur so that you could see it wasn't real fur. And actually, in my mind, if you see that in the street, you're going to go, that looks like fur, that'll keep me as warm as fur, and fur feels really wrong. So I'm going to get that instead.
Fur is actually really trendy right now. It has been trending since about 2018 and doesn't show any signs of going anywhere. So there is a lot of faux fur coats out there right now in the stores. But faux fur also has its issues, and I would argue is just as terrible for animals as the fur industry is. And that's because today's faux fur and vegan leather is made of synthetic fibers, many which include acrylic and polyester, which are forms of plastic. And polyester is essentially just plastic spun into a thread, and plastic is not biodegradable, as we know. There's an absolute apocalypse of plastic right now, and plastic actually takes anywhere from 500 years to more than 1,000 years to break down in landfills. So it is not biodegradable. It's very bad for the environment, and it's also a byproduct of petroleum, which is a fossil fuel. So it's bad for the environment because it doesn't biodegrade, but also because it comes from fossil fuels. So it's a bit of a double whammy. We need to, as a society, limit our plastic consumption, and that includes fibers that are made out of plastic and plastic derivatives like polyester, which unfortunately a lot of faux fur is made from. If you do have a real fur coat, you could bury that out in the backyard after taking out the lining, of course, because the lining of real fur coats is often also polyester. But if you take out the lining and you bury it in your backyard, it would completely break down within 6 months to a year. So that real fur coat is going to return to the earth because it's made of natural fibers. Real fur is biodegradable, whereas fake fur is not. A lot of fake fur is also made from acrylic. Like some of the cheaper varieties that you would find in the high street shops are made from acrylic. And it actually has the worst environmental impact of the 9 fibers studied in a 2014 report by the European Commission. So acrylic is even worse than polyester. Just the amount of resources that it takes to produce acrylic and acrylic fibers is really terrible for the environment. So if you own a faux fur garment and you wash it, plastic microfibers from that garment actually leak into the water system from your washing machine. So in a 2018 report by environmental organization Friends of the Earth, synthetic clothing was named one of the leading sources of microplastic pollution in the UK. That doesn't just go for faux fur, that goes for any garment that you own that is made out of polyester, acrylic, or any of those man-made fibers. So Julian Kirby, who is the plastic campaigner for Friends of the Earth, told the Guardian newspaper in 2018 that microplastic pollution may be largely invisible, but it's having a potentially devastating effect on our natural environment, especially as it can be mistaken for food by some of our smallest ocean creatures, which are then eaten by bigger creatures as part of the food chain. According to a study from the Ocean Conservancy, plastic has been found inside the bodies of more than 60% of seabirds and 100% of sea turtles, which is contributing to a rise in extinction rates of various species. So obviously faux fur is just as devastating for the environment. So actually, if you own a faux fur garment and you wash it a lot, like on a regular basis, there is a potential that you are actually contributing to the deaths of more animals than a real fur coat would have. Any real fur coat, there are about 50 to 100 pelts depending on the size of the coat and the animal that is used for the coat. So that's 50 to 100 dead animals to make one coat. However, if you have a faux fur coat and it's made of acrylic or polyester or some kind of other petroleum-based man-made fiber, it could potentially be killing hundreds to thousands of aquatic animals. And actually, fake fur has more of an impact in that sense. Obviously, that comes down to individual preferences and habits. If you're someone who washes your coats on a regular basis, then you're contributing more to environmental destruction and pollution than somebody who perhaps doesn't wash their coats or maybe has them professionally dry cleaned once every year. Fur coats, like real fur coats, cannot be washed. So if you want to clean them, you have to either take them to a professional cleaner who knows how to clean fur properly, or what I do personally is at the end of every summer when I take my fur out of storage and get it ready for the season ahead, I just brush it down, brush any dust out of it. I do any repairs to the lining that I might need to do, and then I just hang them outside. Like I pick a cold sunny day and I hang my coats outside in the shade and I just let the fresh air clean them. Because if you think about it, the animals that the fur came from, think about how they would have cleaned themselves. They never took a bath. They didn't wash themselves with soap or water. Fur is very self-cleaning, and so you don't really have to do much in terms of cleaning your real fur coats. So that being said, not all faux fur is created equally. Many high fashion brands that use replica fur argue that the high quality materials that they use do not have the same negative impact on our planet as some of the cheaper high street fashion brands would use. But ultimately, when faux fur trends trickle down into those fast fashion brands, this becomes harmful to our environment, because those high street brands that we all buy our clothes from, obviously they're not going to use the really expensive, high-end, sustainable faux fur that a designer like Chloe or Stella McCartney would be using, just because acrylic and polyester furs are going to be a lot cheaper to make. So if you're a big name fast fashion brand and you're churning out like hundreds of fur coats every day in your factories, you're not going to be using that expensive, sustainable, closed loop faux fur that a high-end designer is going to be using. So if you do want a fake fur coat, make sure that you're buying it from one of the designers who use those high-end materials, and also make sure that it's something you're going to wear for years to come. Make sure you know where the material is coming from. Make sure that the designer is transparent about their process in making it. Make sure that that faux fur is sustainable, that it's not being made with petroleum-based products. Pass it down to your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, whatever. Treat it the same way you would treat an actual fur coat, because that's the way that you're going to be able to wear faux fur without having much of an environmental impact. However, the obvious point there is that not all of us can afford a really high-end, expensive designer fake fur coat. So if you want fake fur and you're a regular person, vintage secondhand is the best way to go. Using vintage clothing is always the best option no matter what. There are a lot of really good vintage options for faux fur. I actually have a faux fur coat that's from the 1960s that I bought secondhand. But again, faux fur back then wasn't as high quality as it is now. So keep that in mind when you even buy a vintage faux fur coat. Make sure that you don't ever wash it. Get it professionally cleaned, or treat it the same way as you would treat real fur. Brush it down once a year, hang it outside on a cold, dry day, let the fresh air and the sun get at it. And that's all the cleaning that you need to do. Don't ever put it in the washing machine, because faux fur from previous decades was all made out of those microplastics and they will leach into the environment. So just keep that in mind. Animals who are raised for their fur are factory farmed in horrible conditions, which is why I would never ever in a million years buy a new piece of fur, unless I knew for sure that the animal it came from was trapped and hunted ethically and sustainably. And I actually did buy a couple of rabbit pelts from an indigenous trapper once, but I will tell you guys that story later when I show you my my fur pieces. Fur is also a visible status symbol, and it has connotations of wealth and privilege. So as a relatively thin and passably attractive white woman, this is something that I think about a lot. It's actually the only thing that gives me pause whenever I wear my fur coats, and I'm careful not to wear them in certain places for that reason, because I'm very aware that when I wear a fur coat out in public, it will be seen as a status symbol and a symbol of privilege, even though I am not wealthy by any measure, by any means. Like, I don't own any property, I have no assets, like I am not by any stretch of the imagination wealthy. I do have certain privileges because of the color of my skin and because of the fact that, as I said before, I'm relatively thin and like passively attractive, so that gives me privilege, but I'm certainly not a wealthy person. But I am very aware that that's how I appear when I wear fur in public. So I'm careful about when I wear it, how I wear it, and the places that I wear it to. A lot of the reason that people feel so strongly about fur is that it's an outward symbol of animal cruelty coupled with class distinction. In general, people don't get as angry about McDonald's hamburgers because even though they're just as cruel to animals as a new fur coat, McDonald's as a brand is associated with everyday working class people, and therefore it's easier to stomach until you eat there.
Boom. Roasted.
So fur has come to symbolize the flagrant coldness and cruelty of the owner classes, first being worn by kings and aristocrats throughout history, and then by wealthy capitalists and movie stars throughout the 20th century. It's seen as the embodiment of the selfishness and excess of the world's wealthiest people, so it's a target of class-based anger and antagonism wrapped up in animal cruelty narratives. Wearing fur kind of makes you look like a wealthy person who doesn't care what happens to the animals or the environment or the people around them that gave them this position of privilege in the first place. Fur is the most visible symbol of that. It's like putting a sign on your back screaming, "I don't give a fuck about anyone or anything other than myself and how I look." I am very aware of that when I put my fur coats on. Like, I have my reasons for wearing them and it has nothing to do with status, but I'm always aware that that can be how it's perceived when I put my coats on. So that's actually the one thing that does give me pause every time I wear them. I've never had anyone comment on my fur coats that I've worn in public. Actually, that's not true. One time I went to the hospital to have some x-rays done and a woman got into the elevator with me, and it was like January, so it was really cold that day, and I was wearing one of my fur coats, and the woman who got into the elevator with me made a comment about how I'm brave to be wearing that in public. And then I explained to her, I was like, well, it's vintage, so I don't feel bad about wearing it. And I also got it for like 40 bucks, so it wasn't even like expensive. It was actually a lot cheaper than like a new coat would be from a store. So then after I kind of explained the story about my fur coat and where it came from, she said, oh, she's like, well, you know, I actually have a fur coat at home that my grandmother gave me, but I never wear it in public because I'm scared of people commenting. Maybe I should. And I said, absolutely, why not? It's warm. We live in Canada. It gets freaking cold in the winter. Why not wear your fur coat? Who cares what people think? So that's actually the only time that anyone has ever said anything to me about wearing my fur coats when I've been in public. I've gotten lots of compliments on them when I've worn them, but no one's really ever given me a hard time. So I'm lucky that way. I have gotten a hard time on Instagram when I've posted pictures of fur that I've used in projects for my sewing. I get a lot of comments online, people saying fur is murder.
Fur is murder! Murder! Murder!
And then I just sort of patiently explain like, well, no, I'm recycling this fur. It came from a coat that was falling apart and I bought it to recycle it, rescued it from landfill, etc. You know, people have their opinions and they're entitled to their opinions, and that's okay. But even the comments that I've gotten from people online tend to be from people, usually in England, funny enough. But I think here in Canada, there's less of a stigma around wearing fur in public. It still does exist, but less so than in other places. I think we have sort of more of a pre-established culture for wearing fur. Our country was built on the backs of fur traders and trappers, and the Hudson's Bay Company actually started as like a fur trading operation. So we have that history and that a bit of a culture here in Canada for wearing fur. So the precedent is there. So it's a little bit less of a taboo here than it is in other places like the UK or the States. And actually in 2019, the city of Los Angeles banned the sale of real fur within the city limits, and all of the residents of Los Angeles were banned from making anything that contains real fur. The exception to this rule was vintage fur. Vintage fur is still perfectly legal, so is fake fur, but you actually can't even order fur from somewhere else and have it shipped there. So like if you live in Los Angeles and you want to buy a pair of Uggs, you actually can't because Uggs are made from shearling. So very interesting digression. I didn't know that until just a couple of days ago. But there is in some places like a really strong culture against fur, like to the point of even making it illegal. So I found that interesting because that just doesn't exist here in Canada. So we've explored some of the arguments against faux fur and why that's an issue. Obviously, we know why real fur is an issue. There are a lot of people who feel very strongly about even vintage and secondhand furs and why you shouldn't wear them. Some argue that wearing upcycled vintage fur still promotes the wearing and thereby wanting of any type of fur. So that's like the main argument against wearing vintage fur, is that if you're a fashion person and you're a bit of a trendsetter and you wear real fur in public, other people are going to want to copy you and therefore they're going to want to wear real fur as well.
You thought about how if you wear a fur, you're kind of encouraging others to wear fur.
So every time I hear that argument, I always just think like, yeah, not where I live though. The thing is that new fur coats especially cost thousands of dollars. Some of them cost tens of thousands of dollars. And if you want like a brand new mink coat, like full length mink coat, that's gonna run you like over $100,000 for one of those coats. So I don't know about you guys and where you live, but where I live, nobody, not a single person is going to be spending thousands of dollars on a brand new fur coat. I can like walk down the street covered head to toe in fur. Not a single person where I live is going to then run out and buy a brand new fur coat. Like, it's just not gonna happen. I don't live in a very affluent neighborhood. I mean, I live in like a standard suburban middle class neighborhood where people are more concerned about paying their mortgage and putting food on the table than they are about wearing glamorous fur coats. So it's just not like, it's not gonna happen. Like, even when I'm in the city and I'm wearing my fur coat, anyone that I happen to walk by who likes my coat, if they have the scratch to go out and buy like a brand new chinchilla coat, they're gonna do that anyway, and they probably would have done that whether or not I influenced them. I don't have enough influence socially or economically to be able to influence somebody who can afford a real fur coat to go out and buy one. We do not run in the same circles. I would not ever even encounter someone who was wealthy enough to afford that. So at least for me, I'm not in danger of influencing someone to go out and buy a real fur coat. So I can see where that argument comes from. What I would be more concerned with actually is wearing my fur coat down the street and then somebody wanting to go out and buy a fake fur coat. That's more plausible than somebody being influenced to buy a real fur coat by anything that I wear. And that actually concerns me more because, as we've explored, fake fur is actually way worse for the environment than real fur is, and way more harmful to animals. So I would be concerned by that. So that's why I feel a responsibility to talk about vintage fur and where you can get it and why it's important and how it's a good sustainable alternative. And if I do encounter anyone out in public who compliments my fur coat when I'm wearing it, I always make sure to tell them, yeah, it's real fur, it's vintage, I got it at this place, it was this much, it was very affordable, because I don't want that person to then go and run out to like Zara or H&M and buy a fake fur coat, because that's going to do a lot more environmental damage than buying a secondhand fur coat. So that's a responsibility that I take on whenever I wear my fur in public, and that's something that I think about. I'm not concerned about someone buying real fur based on what I wear at all whatsoever. If you want to buy and wear fur, whether it's real or fake, the best option is always secondhand. The best option for any type of clothes is always secondhand if you can find it. And the same rule applies here, especially here. Thrift stores are just groaning under the weight of vintage fur and shearling coats that sell for literally next to nothing, and occasionally you can find faux fur in thrift stores as well. Secondhand is always the way to go. I am always going to say that. Most of my wardrobe is secondhand. Like this shirt that I'm wearing right now, thrifted. Pretty much everything in my wardrobe is thrifted. The thing about thrifting though is that you have to really commit to it. It is a process. And you have to give yourself the time and the energy to go on a regular basis, scout out 3 or 4 really good thrift stores in your area, commit to visiting them like once a week each, and spend a couple hours every time you visit, really go through the racks. You can find some gems. That's the thing. A lot of people don't have the time or the energy to thrift, but if you can really find some awesome pieces. One time I found a vintage Chanel skirt suit at a Value Village at Yonge & Steeles in Toronto, and it was $30, and I bought it and I took it to the Chanel boutique and had it authenticated, and they told me it was real and had been made in their atelier in France sometime between 1987 and 1989. So that's like a whole other story. I'm gonna do a video on that because I actually just altered the skirt from that suit. But all this to say that thrifting is the best way to get clothes, like hands down. You can find some real gems. I have a lot of designer pieces in my wardrobe. All of them are thrifted, every single one. I have never in my life bought a new designer item. I never will buy a new designer item. I will always get them secondhand. It is the way to go, like hands down. So I've also never paid more than $100 for a designer piece of clothing. So thrifting. All of my furs and my leather goods were bought secondhand. And I have never, ever bought an item brand new that came from an animal, including my leather jackets and shoes. Even my lambskin Balenciaga city bag was bought secondhand. So I am a big proponent of thrifting, like do it, seriously. So I have a pretty big collection of vintage fur, which I'm gonna show you guys in a minute. I have like full-on coats and I have fur accessories as well. Why do I love vintage fur so much? Well, first of all, it's efficient. I'm Canadian, as I've said, and even though I live in Southern Ontario, which is the warmest part of the country, it still gets really cold here in the winter. I'm talking bone-chilling, skin-stabbing, take-your-breath-away temperatures that can dip below minus 30 degrees Celsius in the winter. For those of you watching who live in warmer climates and can't even imagine how cold that is, it's about 15 to 20 degrees colder than your freezer. So imagine spending 3 to 4 months every year walking around inside your freezer, only colder.
He done froze up too!
So yeah, you want to be warm. And trust me, nothing keeps you warm like fur. Most natural fur is water resistant too, especially if it comes from a semi-aquatic animal like mink or muskrat or beaver. So you get all the benefits of a down-filled puffer coat or tech jacket without the synthetic fabric and subsequent sweatiness of like a parka. Fur coats are way more comfortable to wear than down jackets and parkas. When you wear a down jacket in the winter and then get into a streetcar or a subway or go inside a mall or shop, after like 5 minutes of being indoors, you start to sweat. So all of my fellow Canadians, you will know this. Like, you will sweat your balls off after 5 minutes being indoors in a down jacket, especially if you have like layers of sweaters and cardigans underneath that. It's not comfortable to wear. And that's because the outer shells of those kinds of jackets are made from polyester and other man-made fibers that are derivatives of plastic, which means they don't breathe. So when you put on your down parka, you're literally wrapping yourself in plastic wrap that's like stuffed with feathers. So the second you go inside for like any amount of time, you're gonna be sweating. And all that sweat will get trapped inside your coat next to your body, and you'll get overheated really fast. But a fur coat actually breathes, meaning that it will regulate your body temperature, whether indoors or outside, keeping you warm when you're outside, but not too warm, and keeping you relatively cool as soon as you go indoors as well. About parkas, and this is like a purely aesthetic thing, but at least for me, they tend to make me feel really lumpy and dumpy. I do have a couple of down-filled parkas that I wear if it's like pouring rain in the winter time and I need to walk my dog or something. I'll just like throw on my parka. But every time I do, I feel like the Michelin Man. Like, I just feel like I'm putting on rolls and rolls and rolls of padding that doesn't need to be there. I know that parkas and technical fashion has been really trendy the last few years, but I just have never been able to jump on that bandwagon. Every time I put on a down-filled coat, I feel like I'm putting on 100 pounds on my body, and I just don't like the feeling at all. That's a personal choice. If you love parkas, like, go for it. But for me, at least, I just don't find them comfortable to wear. Not physically comfortable because I get overheated when I wear them, and not like mentally comfortable as well. I just feel unattractive and not very fun when I wear them. I feel like it kind of kills my creativity. It kills my joy a little bit. So I don't wear parkas. So that's a reason that I wear fur. Like, if it's January and it's minus 40 degrees outside, I will like grab my fur jacket before I grab my parka. And unlike parkas, if you wear a fur coat, no matter what, you're gonna feel really elegant and chic every time you put it on. Even if you're wearing a stained sweatsuit or like pajamas underneath, you throw on a fur coat over top and like a hat, you're gonna feel like $1,000,000. Even if you only paid $30 for that fur coat, like, you're gonna feel expensive and classy and elegant. And that's why I love it, because it takes a lot of the pressure off of building out an outfit in the wintertime. I can like throw on a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt and then put my fur coat over top of it, and I'm gonna look nice no matter what. So that's another reason I love them. Another reason I love fur coats is that they're durable. Fur coats last for generations if they're cared for properly, and any holes or tears in them can be really easily mended. I mend my fur coats all of the time. A lot of the fur in my collection was not in the best condition when I bought it. The fur itself was really beautiful, but in almost every case where I've bought a fur coat, the lining was coming out in places. In one instance, like, the lining was almost completely disintegrated. So a lot of the time, like, the fur itself will hold up better than the actual lining. So because I know how to sew, that's not a problem for me. If I see a fur coat and the lining is crappy, like, I have no problem just ripping it out and replacing it. I actually do a lot of mending on my coats, and because I do that, they've lasted me for years and years, and they will continue to last me for years to come, I hope. They're really durable. Like, that's not something that you would do on a faux fur jacket. Like, you wouldn't mend it like that. You'd throw it out or give it away, or you donate it and you'd go and buy another one. But with fur, you don't do that. You mend it, you patch it up, you make it last. If your fur coat does rip, it tends to rip along the seam lines of where the pelts are sewn together. So all you have to do is sew the seam back up, and then the coat is like brand new. But to contrast, if like a down jacket or a parka rips, it tends to tear into the actual fabric itself, making it impossible to fix properly. So your only options in that case, if your parka sustains damage, is to either patch up the hole, which will make your coat look really shabby, or to throw it out and buy a new one, which means another piece of plastic for the landfill. A lot of the outer material of those down jackets is really thin, especially those technical jackets. So I find that it tears really easily, and then the feathers poke out. And unfortunately, once that happens, there's no way to fix it. Like, you either throw it out or you patch it up. You really don't have many options. So according to the Waste and Resources Action Program in the UK, the average lifetime for any particular garment is estimated at only 2.2 years. That's insane. That's not even 2.5 years before that garment ends up in landfill. And the same study found that expanding the life of clothing by a time as small as even 9 months can significantly reduce its environmental impact. So we know this already. We don't need stats to tell us this. The longer that you can preserve and keep and wear your clothing, the less of an environmental impact it's actually going to have. I never get rid of clothes. Well, sometimes I do. I get rid of them if I no longer like the way they look, then I'll donate them or give them away. But I never get rid of clothing because it rips or tears. If I find damage in my clothes, I either repair the damage, or if it's irreparable and I can't do anything with it, then I use the fabric from that clothing to make something else. Usually mock-ups for my patterns that I make in my sewing projects, or I'll harvest the buttons off of them, or I'll cut it up and use it for trim, or I'll use it for lining and other garments. Like, I try to make my garments last as long as possible. And fur coats are really good at lasting. They can sustain a lot of damage and not much is going to happen to them. They're extremely durable, and that's one of the reasons I love them so much. My first fur coat was actually a family heirloom that was passed down from my great-grandmother. She had brought it over from Poland when she came to Canada in the early 1900s, and my grandmother and my aunts all wore it. When I was born, my aunt had it cut down and remade into a kid-sized coat, which both me and my younger sister wore until we grew out of it. When my cousin's daughter was born several years ago, my parents sent him the coat and his daughter now wears it. And no one can remember what the actual pelts were. I think maybe it was skunk or perhaps raccoon, but they're well over 100 years old now and still in good shape. And almost all the women on my dad's side of the family have worn this coat at one point or another. So this fur coat has been passed through my family for well over 100 years and it's still being worn to this day. So you just wouldn't ever get that kind of mileage out of a parka or even out of a faux fur coat. That's something that only real fur can give you. The other reason I love fur coats is that they can be upcycled, recycled, and donated. If your coat does sustain a lot of damage and starts to look shabby, you can easily upcycle it into mittens, hats, stoles, or trim for other coats. If you don't want to bother with that, you can also sell them for a good price, donate them to a thrift store, or give them to an animal shelter that will use it to keep rescued baby animals warm. So yes, once upon a time, some animals died to make this coat, and that's really sad and unfortunate, but by re-wearing, reusing, upcycling, and donating it, you're not only honoring the lives of the animals who died to make it, you're also potentially using it to save the lives of more baby animals who are alive right now today. So not a lot of people actually know that. If you have a fur coat that was given to you by your mother or your grandmother and you don't want to wear it or you're against wearing it for whatever reason, you can donate it to an animal shelter and they'll use it to keep baby animals alive. You can't do that with faux fur. You can't do that with parkas. So that's an option for you. There's a lot of people on Etsy who will take recycled vintage furs as well and they upcycle them into mittens and hats and accessories and things of that nature. So you can give your coat to one of them, you can sell it, you can donate it. There's so much you can do with a vintage fur coat. Again, faux fur does not have that kind of mileage. The bottom line is using things that already exist, like vintage fur coats, doesn't harm any animals who are alive right now, and it will avoid damaging the planet further through the production of a new piece of clothing, because when you buy a vintage fur coat, you're supporting circular fashion. And also, fur coats are just beautiful, okay? You know me, aesthetics before practicality, always, every time.
These are authentic, patent leather, and if they don't fit, so help me, I'm gonna wear them anyway.
But one of the reasons I love fur coats so much is because they're pretty much the only thing in my closet that are both beautiful and practical. Practical for all the reasons I just listed, and beautiful because, well, look at them. A fur coat will dress up anything, absolutely anything. You can get away with wearing sweatpants and even full-on pajama sets in public if you throw on a fur coat over top. Like that scene in the first Sex and the City movie where Carrie Bradshaw goes over to Miranda's house in the middle of the night on New Year's Eve, throwing on a fabulous fur coat over a pajama set and heels. That scene is burned into my brain. I want to be Carrie Bradshaw in that scene. But that's what I mean. Put on a fur coat and you will look fabulous no matter what you're wearing. Doesn't matter what's underneath it. So speaking of beautiful outfits, I'm going to show you my collection of vintage and secondhand furs, and I'll tell you how much each item cost, where I bought it, any alterations that I made to it, and why I love it. So let's go. This was the first fur coat I bought as an adult, and I found it at a vintage store in Parkdale, my old neighborhood in Toronto. It was on sale for $40, so I nabbed it, and I love to wear it with skinny jeans, black boots, and a turtleneck underneath. I'm not sure exactly how old this beauty is, but the cut and presence of shearling would suggest to me it's from the 70s or maybe the early 80s. It's rabbit fur, which has been dyed to look like fox, and rabbit is the most common fur to come across, so it's pretty affordable. You can identify it immediately because the pile is soft and silky, almost like petting a cat with no undercoat. Also, rabbit sheds. No one told me this before I bought it, so I'm telling you now, just beware. I picked up this beauty at the same thrift store that I found my rabbit coat at, and it was also $40 marked down from $80. The fur is in absolute pristine condition, but the lining was coming out a bit at the back, so I had to sew it back down, but then it was good as new. The owners of the shop where I bought it weren't sure what kind of fur it is, but they thought maybe muskrat, and further research on my part confirmed their suspicions, so that's what I'm going with. I own a lot of coats. Living in Canada means that you also live in your winter coat for half the year, so having more than one for me is an essential part of avoiding the winter blahs, and this is by far my most worn. I've had it for about 4 years, and I wear it roughly 30 to 40 times per season, with pretty much everything in my wardrobe. This is your classic mid-century glamour mink stole, and I bought it last year for $20 at Black Market Vintage on Queen West in Toronto. My fellow Torontonians will know what an absolute gem that store is, so shout out to Black Market. When I bought it, the acetate lining had all but disintegrated, and it was essentially just a bunch of pelts left clinging together, in some places literally by a thread. It needed some serious TLC, so as soon as I got home, I ripped out what was left of the old lining, reinforced the seams that were starting to come loose, and cut new lining out of some blue silk habitai that I had left over from a project I'd done last fall. It's as good as new now, and I love that I was able to replace the old acetate lining with a real silk one, which is also a biodegradable material. My favorite way to wear it is with my gray merino wool sweater dress or with the turtleneck and my vintage Chanel skirt. Another mink stole, this one from Shoney's in Kensington Market. A friend of mine who lives in the neighborhood saw it there last winter and texted me a picture, knowing my love of vintage fur. I fell in love with it, so he very kindly offered to pick it up for me. I'm not sure exactly how old it is, but pelts with the tails still intact were popular in the 1930s and 40s, so I'm dating it to approximately the Great Depression / World War II era. I haven't actually worn this yet in public, and to be honest, I'm not sure that I would. I find it fascinating more as an antique object than a piece of clothing to actually wear, and I've learned a lot about how fur garments are made by studying it. This very old-fashioned looking stole was actually entirely handmade by me as part of a circa 1899 winter walking suit costume that I made last year. The fur is blonde mink, and I recycled it from an old bolero that I bought off of a gentleman in Montreal who buys and sells old furs that are falling apart for people who want to upcycle them. The bolero was ugly as sin and literally coming apart at the seams, but the fur was in great shape, so I ripped it up and remade it into a detachable collar for this outfit. I had enough left over to make matching cuffs on the jacket, and it was a beautiful addition to the whole ensemble. This is another piece that I handmade, also for the 1899 winter walking suit outfit. It's the only piece of fur that I've ever bought new, and it's made out of 2 rabbit pelts that I bought for $20 each from an indigenous trapper who cooks and eats the rabbits he traps and then cleans and sells the pelts. I didn't feel bad about this at all because I was supporting a very small local indigenous-owned operation and because the fur was obtained ethically, respectfully, and every part of the animal was used. This is the only condition under which I would ever buy new fur, and I made sure to use up every last scrap of each pelt in my project. Even the leftover bits I rolled up and attached to the hat that I made to match the outfit. I picked up this mink collar in a $10 bin at a thrift store in Kensington Market last year to have in my stash and upcycle as trim on future projects. I still don't have a project in mind that I would use it for, so for now I just throw it over some of my wool peacoats to dress them up a bit whenever the mood strikes me. This is my only faux fur coat, and I bought it secondhand about 3 years ago at one of those everything is $10 vintage stores near the Ossington Strip in Toronto. And yes, it was actually $10. I remember paying for it entirely with leftover change in my wallet. It dates back to the 1960s, I think, and I honestly don't wear it a ton because it's not that warm. I've actually thought about selling it from time to time, but it works really well with my batwing sleeve sweaters because the arm size are so low on this coat that it doesn't immediately yank up my sweater the second I put it on like the other coats do. I do love that it has a hood, and wearing it feels like wrapping yourself up in a blanket and stepping outside. This coat is the absolute gem of my collection and also my most recent acquisition. It's red fox fur, and you can tell because of the long silky guard hairs with that fluffy undercoat spotted with brown here and there. I've always wanted a vintage fox fur coat, and I was thrilled to find this one and bought it immediately. I found it at Value Village for $34, and it was cheap because they thought it was fake fur and because the lining was coming off the back of the coat. The fur is in excellent condition though, and so is the lining. It just needed to be tacked back into place, which was an easy 10-minute fix. I love how fluffy and enormous it is and how it goes down almost to my ankles. It's a few sizes too big for me, but oversized coats are in style right now, and I love that I can belt it to give some shape to all that volume. The day after I bought it, I was searching through the pockets and I found an old TTC token from 1954, the same year that Toronto opened its first subway line and also the year that my dad was born. I think it's so cool to have this tangible link to the past and to the woman who rode the brand new subway 68 years ago, then put a token in her pocket and forgot it was there. Okay, that was fun. All this being said, the choice to wear fur, whether real or fake or at all, is totally yours. What you put on your body is ultimately a reflection of your values, your ideals, and who you are as a person, which is why clothing is such an intimate thing. Whatever your choice is, it's the right one for you, and wherever you stand on the debate about real fur versus fake fur, I hope that I was able to at least present you with some interesting points that you can take away and think about if you care about this sort of stuff. The only thing I ask is to please stop shaming people for their choices. Don't throw buckets of red paint on people wearing fur coats because you don't know where that coat came from. Chances are it's probably vintage or fake. Fake fur has come a long way since the early 2000s, and most of it is indistinguishable from real fur. Don't assume from a glance that someone is a terrible person who supports animal cruelty just because they're wearing fur. You don't know the story behind that garment. I also saw a PETA ad while I was doing research for this video about how to talk to people who are wearing fur, and I just found it personally really very condescending and distasteful.
We need to always thank people for making the right decision and encourage them to do better in the future and offer to help. Let's try that again. Hi, is that a real fur?
It's fake, actually. I used to wear real fur until somebody told me what happens to the animals.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for making a compassionate decision. Have a good day.
Because the entire ad assumes that the person wearing fur does not know what they're doing, doesn't know about animal cruelty, and doesn't know how they're coming off or how they're being perceived, which is just not true. That's not the case. Most people who choose to wear fur have their reasons for doing it. I just explained to you my reasons for wearing vintage fur. Don't assume that because someone is wearing fur, they don't know what they're doing, or that they're stupid, or that they're just a brainless, fashion-obsessed robot. I'm not gonna play the PETA ad in my video because I don't really wanna give it any more airtime, but I will link to it in the description below if you're interested in checking it out. Like I said, I found it a little distasteful. Don't assume that because somebody is wearing fur that they're a terrible person.
50.
Maybe ask them about it. Don't be afraid to ask them. Most of us are really okay with people asking us questions, and actually, I personally love that. I'm more than happy to share where I got my coats from, why I wear vintage fur, and to start a conversation about that. So if you're curious, if you want to know, just ask them about it. Don't assume that they're dumb or cruel. That's something that really bothers me. And just the same, for those of us who love fur and wear it all the time, there's no need to be condescending or judgmental towards animal rights activists who get mad at us for wearing fur. Chances are they don't know the full story either, or they just feel really strongly about it. Honestly, good on them for standing up for something that they believe in. The world needs more of that kind of passion, and there's always something to be learned. Maybe they have an interesting point that we've never thought about before. It's a really interesting way to know how you come off to other people. And I think there's a tendency in the fashion world to look down on like those PETA people and they're so stupid and they don't know what they're talking about. And that's just not true. They do know what they're talking about. They're not stupid. They just feel really strongly about this issue. And I think that's a really good thing. So just let's be kind to one another. That's all I ask. Okay, that's all I have to say on the subject for now, but I'd love to hear your take on this hot take. Would you wear real fur if it was vintage? How do you feel about faux fur and its environmental impact? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to get a good discussion going, but please, again, let's be respectful and try to actually just learn from one another instead of creating a social media echo chamber. So that's all I have to say on this subject for now. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I do videos like this. I try to do them every 2 weeks. It's been a little less than that lately just because I haven't really been feeling inspired to make a video lately. I have been working on a Regency Spencer project, which I just posted on my Instagram. So check me out on Instagram if you want more project updates. I tend to post them there versus here because I don't film a lot while I'm sewing. I find it just like gets in the way of my actual sewing. So if you want to see project updates for what I'm working on now, check out my Instagram. I will put the link in the description box below, and then you can see what I'm up to. And I will be back in a few weeks with another video that has to do with fashion or history or sewing, one of the three. So that's it for now, my loves. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and toodaloo.